I still remember the day my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I didn't think much of it at first. Unknown numbers usually meant telemarketers or automated messages. But when I saw it was from my cousin Ryan, I knew something was wrong. Ryan isn't the type to call just for small talk. He's a man of few words, someone who values action over conversation. So when his name flashed on my screen, I answered immediately. "Hey Ryan," I said casually, expecting maybe a quick update about his latest project or some family news. But Ryan's voice wasn't calm or casual. It was sharp, like a knife cutting through silence. "They knocked it down," he said, each word heavy with anger and disbelief. "What do you mean knocked it down? Who did?" My mind raced, trying to piece together what he was saying. "The HOA," he replied, his tone icy. "They bulldozed my house." For a moment, I thought I misheard him. How could anyone bulldoze a house? That kind of thing doesn't happen in real life. It's the stuff of nightmares or bad movies. But Ryan wasn't joking. His voice told me everything I needed to know. This was real. Ryan had bought that house 2 years ago after retiring from active duty in the U.S. Army. It wasn't just any house. It was his dream home. A modest ranch-style place nestled in Willow Creek Estates, a neighborhood known for its perfect lawns and quiet streets. Ryan spent months fixing it up, adding personal touches everywhere. There was a flagpole in the front yard, a tribute to his years of service. The garden in the backyard grew tomatoes, peppers, and herbs, all planted by his own hands. Every corner of that house reflected who he was, a disciplined, hard-working man who valued peace and stability. When Ryan got deployed overseas 6 months ago, he made sure everything was in order before leaving. He paid his bills, settled his taxes, and hired a property manager to handle maintenance while he was gone. He trusted the system, believed that if he followed the rules, nothing bad would happen. But he was wrong. According to Ryan, the HOA claimed he hadn't responded to their notices about non-compliance. They said his grass was too long, his mailbox was the wrong color, and his shutters didn't match the approved palette. None of these issues were urgent enough to warrant drastic action, but apparently that didn't matter to them. Without giving him a chance to fix the problems, or even confirming they reached him, they sent in a crew and demolished the entire house. The kicker? All their letters went to the wrong address. Their emails disappeared into cyberspace, and when Ryan finally returned from deployment, eager to step back into the life he'd built, he found nothing but rubble where his home once stood. As Ryan explained all of this, I felt a mix-up of emotions: shock, anger, and sadness. How could something like this happen? How could a group of people tasked with protecting a community turn around and destroy one of its members? Then, as if remembering something important, Ryan paused for a beat. "Oh, and one more thing," he said, his tone shifting slightly. "You remember what I do for a living, right?" It took me a second to process his question. Of course I remembered. Ryan wasn't just another homeowner. He was General Ryan Harper, a high-ranking officer in the U.S. Army, a man who had dedicated his life to serving his country, leading troops, and making tough decisions under pressure. Suddenly, the situation felt even bigger than I'd imagined. This wasn't just a case of a homeowner versus an HOA. This was something else entirely, something explosive. And as I hung up the phone that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that Willow Creek Estates and the HOA had no idea what they were dealing with. Willow Creek Estates was the kind of neighborhood people dreamed about. At least, that's what the brochures said. Rows of perfectly trimmed lawns stretched as far as the eye could see, each house painted in soft, neutral tones that screamed elegance and order. The streets were quiet, except for the occasional hum of a lawnmower or the laughter of kids playing in cul-de-sacs. On weekends, neighbors would host barbecues, exchanging pleasantries over plates of burgers and potato salad. It all seemed so perfect. But perfection comes at a price. The Homeowners Association, HOA, ruled Willow Creek with an iron fist, hidden behind a smile and a clipboard. Their rules weren't just guidelines. They were commandments carved in stone. Want to paint your front door red? Not allowed unless it matches the approved shade listed in Appendix C. Thinking of planting a tree? Better submit a request form 6 months in advance. Leave your trash cans out after 8 a.m. Expect a fine in the mail by noon. At first glance, these rules might seem harmless. Annoying, sure, but not exactly life-ruining. But dig a little deeper, and you'd find stories that made your blood boil. Take Mrs. Peterson, for example. She once put up a small wind chime on her porch, a gift from her late husband, and got hit with a $500 penalty because it violated aesthetic standards. Or Mr. Caldwell, who spent weeks building a wooden fence around his backyard, only to have it torn down because he used the wrong type of screws. The HOA didn't just enforce rules. They weaponized them. If you crossed them, even accidentally, they made sure you paid for repairs, fines, legal fees, anything they could think of. And if you fought back, well, let's just say things could get ugly fast. Ryan had known about the HOA's reputation before buying his house. He'd read the covenants, flipped through the rulebook, and nodded along during the orientation meeting. But he figured it wouldn't be a problem. After all, he wasn't the type to break rules. He was disciplined, meticulous, and respectful, the kind of person who followed orders without question. His military background made him a natural fit for a place like Willow Creek. For the first year, everything went smoothly. Ryan paid his dues on time, kept his lawn immaculate, and attended every HOA event with a polite smile. He even helped organize the annual 4th of July parade, earning praise from Cheryl Dawson, the HOA president. Things were good, or so he thought. Then came the deployment notice. Ryan had been called back to active duty overseas, a mission that would keep him away for 6 months. It wasn't ideal timing, but he didn't have a choice. Before leaving, he did everything he could to prepare. He hired a property manager named Lisa to handle maintenance, forwarded his mail to a trusted address, and double-checked that all his bills were set to autopay. He trusted Lisa to keep an eye on things, and assumed the HOA would do its job too. What Ryan didn't know was that the HOA had already started circling him like vultures. A few weeks after he left, they sent their first letter. Asterisk, your mailbox is non-compliant. Please repaint within 7 days. Asterisk, when no response came, they sent another. Asterisk, grass exceeds maximum height limit. Immediate action required. Asterisk, then another. Asterisk, shutters must be replaced to match approved color scheme. Asterisk. Each letter grew more urgent, more threatening. But none of them reached Ryan. They were sent to an old address he hadn't used in years. Emails disappeared into spam folders. Phone calls went unanswered because the HOA refused to leave voicemails. By the time they declared Ryan unresponsive, it was almost laughable, if it weren't so horrifying. When Lisa finally noticed something was wrong, it was too late. She arrived one morning to find a crew of workers tearing apart Ryan's house. Bulldozers crushed the carefully tended garden, the flagpole, the shutters Ryan had handpicked himself. Within hours, there was nothing left but a pile of rubble and dirt. Lisa tried to intervene, screaming at the workers to stop, but they ignored her. Orders from the HOA. One of them muttered before climbing back into his truck and driving off. By the time she managed to reach Ryan overseas, the damage was done. When Ryan stepped off the plane 6 months later, tired and ready to return to normal life, he never expected to find devastation waiting for him. Instead of walking into his cozy living room, he stood staring at an empty lot, the ground scared and barren. The reality hit him like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just a house anymore. It was a symbol of everything he'd worked for, and everything that had been taken away. And now, standing there alone, Ryan realized something else. The HOA had made a mistake. A very big, very dangerous mistake. The HOA meeting hall was usually a place of quiet order, where neighbors gathered to discuss things like landscaping budgets and holiday decorations. But tonight, It felt different, charged, almost electric. The air buzzed with whispers as people filed in, glancing nervously at the front of the room. Chairs scraped against the floor, and the faint hum of fluorescent lights overhead did little to ease the tension. Ryan walked in wearing his military uniform, a deliberate choice. His medals gleamed under the harsh lighting, each one a testament to years of service, sacrifice, and leadership. He carried himself with the kind of authority that silenced chatter without him having to say a word. Heads turned as he entered, eyes widening in surprise or darting away uncomfortably. This wasn't just another homeowner showing up to complain about fines. This was General Ryan Harper, and everyone knew it. Cheryl Dawson, the HOA president, stood near the podium, clutching her clipboard like a lifeline. Her usual confident demeanor seemed shaky tonight. She forced a smile when she saw Ryan approach but couldn't quite hide the nervous twitch in her hand. "General Harper," she said, her voice wavering slightly. "We're so glad you could join us." Ryan didn't return the smile. Instead, he fixed her with a steady gaze, the kind that made soldiers stand straighter and enemies reconsider their choices. "I'm sure you are," he replied, his tone calm but sharp enough to cut glass. He took a seat near the front, placing a thick folder on the table in front of him. Inside were copies of every letter, email, and document related to the demolition of his home. There were photos, too, before and after shots of his house, showing exactly what had been lost. He didn't need to say a word for the weight of it all to settle over the room like a storm cloud. When the meeting officially began, Cheryl tried to take control, calling the session to order and running through the agenda as if nothing unusual was happening. But no one was paying attention to her. All eyes were on Ryan, waiting to see what he would do next. Finally, it was his turn to speak. Without hesitation, he rose from his chair and stepped up to the podium. For a moment, he simply looked around the room, meeting each person's gaze. Some looked guilty, others defiant, but most avoided eye contact altogether. "Let me start by saying this isn't personal," Ryan began, his voice steady and clear. "But it is serious, very serious." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "6 months ago, I left this neighborhood trusting that my property would be cared for in my absence. I followed every rule, paid every fee, and ensured everything was in order before I deployed. Imagine my surprise when I returned to find my home reduced to rubble." His tone grew colder with every sentence. "You claim I didn't respond to your notices, that I ignored your warnings. But here's the truth. I never received them. Not one. And even if I had, demolishing someone's house without proper legal process is not just unethical, it's illegal." Cheryl shifted uncomfortably in her seat, opening her mouth to interrupt. But Ryan held up a hand, silencing her instantly. "Save it," he said firmly. "I've already contacted lawyers, and I've filed a lawsuit against this association for damages exceeding $500,000. But that's not all." He reached into the folder and pulled out a stack of papers, holding them up for everyone to see. "These are complaints from other homeowners in this neighborhood. Stories of harassment, unfair fines, and retaliation. It seems I'm not the only one who's been treated poorly." Murmurs rippled through the crowd as people exchanged uneasy glances. Some nodded in agreement, while others looked shocked to hear their own grievances being aired publicly. Ryan let the silence stretch for a beat before delivering his final blow. "If you think I'm going to sit back and let this slide, you're wrong. If you think I'll accept an apology and move on, you're mistaken. What happened to me wasn't just an accident. It was negligence, and I intend to make sure it never happens again." With that, he stepped away from the podium, leaving Cheryl and the rest of the board speechless. As he returned to his seat, the room erupted into murmurs and whispers. People leaned toward each other, sharing hushed conversations about what they'd just witnessed. For the first time in years, the HOA didn't have the upper hand. They weren't dealing with an ordinary homeowner anymore. They were facing someone who knew how to fight back. And judging by the look on Ryan's face, He wasn't going to stop until justice was served. The days following that explosive HOA meeting felt like living in the eye of a hurricane. The neighborhood was eerily quiet, but beneath the surface, tension simmered. Neighbors who had once kept to themselves suddenly found reasons to linger by mailboxes or chat over fences. Everyone wanted to know what would happen next, what Ryan Harper, the man in the uniform with medals on his chest, planned to do. Ryan didn't waste any time. He wasn't the type to sit around and wait for justice to come knocking. Instead, he went straight to work dismantling the HOA's carefully constructed empire, one brick at a time. First, he filed the lawsuit. $500,000 might have sounded extreme to some, but it wasn't just about money. It was about accountability. Ryan made sure the legal complaint detailed every misstep the HOA had taken: the ignored notices, the bulldozed house, the lack of proper communication. He included photos of the rubble where his home used to stand and copies of emails proving they'd sent letters to the wrong address. By the time his lawyers were done, the case looked airtight. But Ryan didn't stop there. He knew lawsuits could drag on for years, and he wanted answers now. So he reached out to local news outlets. Reporters love a good David versus Goliath story, and this one practically wrote itself. Within days, cameras rolled into Willow Creek Estates, capturing footage of the empty lot where Ryan's house once stood. Microphones were shoved into Cheryl Dawson's face as she stammered through half-hearted apologies. Neighbors lined up to share their own horror stories about the HOA, each tale adding fuel to the fire. The media coverage turned Ryan into an overnight sensation, or at least as close to one as you can get in a suburban community. People across the country started paying attention. Talk shows debated whether HOAs had too much power. Social media exploded with hashtags like #JusticeForIan and #HOA Accountability. Even late-night comedians cracked jokes about the HOA that picked the wrong guy. Meanwhile, back in Willow Creek, the HOA scrambled to save face. Cheryl called emergency meetings, trying to rally her board members and figure out how to spin the narrative in their favor. They drafted public statements claiming the demolition was a regrettable misunderstanding and promised reforms to prevent such incidents in the future. But no one bought it. Not after everything that had come out. Then came the real blow. State officials got involved. Thanks to Ryan's connections and the sheer amount of public outrage, an investigation was launched into Willow Creek's HOA practices. Investigators combed through financial records, meeting minutes, and homeowner complaints. What they uncovered shocked even the most skeptical residents. It turned out the HOA hadn't just been strict. They'd been corrupt. Funds meant for community projects had mysteriously disappeared. Fines levied against homeowners often ended up in personal accounts rather than the association's coffers. And those infamous rules. Many of them weren't even legally enforceable. They were just scare tactics designed to keep people in line. As evidence piled up, the walls began closing in on Cheryl and her team. Board members resigned one by one, citing personal reasons or health concerns. Cheryl herself tried to cling to power, issuing tearful apologies during town hall meetings and begging for forgiveness. But her pleas fell flat. No one trusted her anymore. Amid all the chaos, Ryan remained calm. He didn't gloat or seek revenge beyond ensuring accountability. When reporters asked him how he felt about the unfolding scandal, he simply said, "This isn't about me. It's about making sure something like this never happens again. Not here, not anywhere." His measured response only added to his reputation. Neighbors who had once whispered behind closed doors now openly praised him. Some even apologized for not speaking up sooner. One elderly woman named Mrs. Thompson brought him a plate of cookies, tears in her eyes as she admitted she'd been too afraid to challenge the HOA when they fined her for planting roses in her front yard. By the end of the month, Willow Creek Estates looked very different from the polished, rule-bound paradise it once pretended to be. Gone were the smug smiles of the HOA board members. In their place stood ordinary people, flawed, uncertain, and finally willing to listen. And standing tall in the center of it all was Ryan Harper, a reminder that sometimes the best way to protect your home is to fight for the principles it represents. The fallout from the HOA scandal hit Willow Creek Estates like a tidal wave, leaving nothing untouched. What had once been a picture-perfect neighborhood now felt raw and exposed, its carefully maintained facade stripped away to reveal cracks that ran deeper than anyone had imagined. For weeks, life in the community revolved around investigations, resignations, and whispered conversations about what would happen next. Ryan became the reluctant face of change, not because he wanted attention, but because people looked to him for guidance. His calm demeanor and unwavering sense of justice inspired others to speak up too. Neighbors who had suffered silently for years finally found their voices, sharing stories of intimidation, unfair fines, and arbitrary rules that had made their lives miserable. Some talked about how the HOA had fined them for minor infractions, like hanging wind chimes or painting their front doors without permission, while others revealed more serious grievances, such as being denied repairs needed for safety reasons. One man named Tom recounted how the HOA refused to approve his request to install wheelchair ramps at his house after his wife suffered a stroke. They said it compromised the aesthetic appeal of the neighborhood, he told reporters, his voice trembling with anger. Meanwhile, my wife couldn't even get out of the house safely. Stories like these poured out during town hall meetings, each one adding fuel to the growing movement against predatory HOAs. People began organizing themselves, forming committees to rewrite the covenants and restrictions that had governed Willow Creek for decades. Terms like transparency and accountability replaced buzzwords like curb appeal and property values. The shift was subtle but profound, signaling a new chapter for the neighborhood. For Ryan, though, rebuilding wasn't just about changing policies. It was personal. The empty lot where his home once stood served as a daily reminder of everything he'd lost. He could have chosen to sell the land and move somewhere else, far away from the memories and the mess. But running away wasn't his style. Instead, he decided to rebuild, not just his house, but his connection to the community. Construction began on a crisp autumn morning, with neighbors showing up in droves to help. Some brought tools, others brought food and drinks. Kids played nearby, laughing as they watched the foundation take shape. It was messy and chaotic, but there was something beautiful about it, a shared effort to create something meaningful together. Cheryl Dawson and the remnants of the old HOA board tried to make amends, offering to fund the reconstruction and even throwing a ribbon-cutting ceremony when the house was finished. Ryan accepted their apology publicly, but kept his distance privately. He didn't trust them enough to let them back into his life, nor did most of the other residents. When the house was finally completed months later, it looked different from the original. Ryan added touches that reflected who he was now, a survivor, a fighter, and someone who valued substance over appearances. There was still a flagpole in the front yard, but this time it flew 2 flags. The American flag and a smaller one that read *Home Sweet Home*. The garden came back, bigger and better than before, filled with flowers donated by neighbors eager to contribute. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony, Ryan stood on his porch, addressing the crowd gathered below. "This isn't just my home," he said, his voice steady and warm. "It's proof that we're stronger together. That when we stand up for what's right, we can overcome anything." The applause that followed was thunderous, echoing through the streets of Willow Creek. People hugged each other, tears streaming down their faces. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt alive. Not perfect, but real. Of course, the scars remained. The lawsuits dragged on for months, tying up loose ends and ensuring those responsible were held accountable. Several former HOA members faced criminal charges, including fraud and destruction of property. Cheryl disappeared from public view entirely, her clipboard and smile persona replaced by shame and regret. But despite the lingering pain, there was hope. Willow Creek Estates wasn't the same place it used to be. And maybe that was a good thing. Freed from the grip of an oppressive HOA, residents rediscovered the joy of living in a true community, one built on trust, empathy, and mutual respect. And standing tall in the center of it all was Ryan Harper, a symbol of resilience and strength. Though his journey had been long and painful, he emerged victorious, not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever felt powerless against injustice. Ryan's battle with the HOA didn't just change Willow Creek estates, it sent ripples far beyond the quiet streets of the neighborhood. His story became a beacon of hope for homeowners everywhere, proof that even the most ordinary people could stand up to systems of power and win. It wasn't just about bulldozers or fines anymore. It was about reclaiming dignity, fairness, and the right to live without fear of oppression. As news of Ryan's victory spread, communities across the country began to take notice. Homeowners who had been silently enduring similar abuses from their own HOAs found courage in his example. Social media groups popped up overnight, connecting frustrated residents eager to share advice and strategies for fighting back. Lawyers specializing in property law reported a surge in calls from people seeking help with disputes against overbearing associations. Even lawmakers took action, introducing legislation aimed at protecting homeowners from predatory practices. In Willow Creek itself, life slowly returned to normal. But normal looked very different now. Gone were the days when the HOA ruled with an iron fist, enforcing rules that seemed designed more to intimidate than improve. In its place stood a new governing body, one made up of actual homeowners who understood what it meant to balance order with compassion. Meetings were open and transparent, decisions democratic rather than dictatorial. People joked that they hardly recognized the neighborhood anymore, and they meant it as a compliment. But perhaps the biggest change was in the relationships between neighbors. Before the scandal, many residents barely knew each other's names. Now, friendships blossomed over shared struggles and victories. Kids played freely in yards while parents chatted over fences. Barbecues weren't just events organized by the HOA. They were spontaneous gatherings where laughter filled the air and plates overflowed with homemade dishes. The sense of isolation that had once defined Willow Creek gave way to a genuine feeling of belonging. For Ryan, this transformation was bittersweet. On one hand, he felt immense pride knowing his fight had sparked something bigger, something meaningful. Watching his neighbors come together reminded him why he'd chosen Willow Creek in the first place, a place he hoped would feel like home. But on the other hand, he couldn't ignore the emptiness left behind by the loss of his original house. No matter how beautiful the new one was, it would never fully replace the memories tied to the old one. The hours spent fixing leaky faucets, planting tomatoes, hanging photos on freshly painted walls. Those moments were gone forever, erased along with the structure itself. Still, Ryan refused to let bitterness define him. Instead, he focused on using his experience to help others avoid the same fate. He started giving talks at community centers and town halls, sharing his story and offering practical advice for dealing with difficult HOAs. "You don't have to be a general to fight these battles," he often said during these speeches. "All you need is determination, evidence, and the willingness to stand your ground." His message resonated deeply, especially with veterans and military families who saw parallels between Ryan's leadership skills and their own. Many reached out to thank him, not just for exposing corruption, but for reminding them that service doesn't end when you leave active duty. Fighting for justice, whether on the battlefield or in your backyard, is always worth it. At home, Ryan settled into a routine that felt almost peaceful. He spent mornings tending to his garden, afternoons walking Max around the block, and evenings sipping coffee on the porch. Neighbors stopped by regularly, bringing updates about ongoing reforms or simply wanting to chat. Sometimes, kids from the cul-de-sac would knock on his door, asking if he'd tell them another story about his time in the Army. Ryan always obliged, regaling them with tales of camaraderie and bravery, careful to keep things age-appropriate. Looking back, Ryan realized his journey had taught him something unexpected. Strength isn't just about winning wars. It's also about building bridges. By standing up to the HOA, he hadn't just saved himself. He'd helped create a community rooted in trust, respect, and kindness. And in doing so, he'd found a deeper kind of peace than he ever imagined possible. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, Ryan sat on his porch with Max curled up at his feet. Across the street, Mrs. Thompson waved as she watered her roses. Roses she planted despite years of HOA threats. Next door, Jake mowed his lawn, headphones on, humming along to whatever song played through his earbuds. The neighborhood buzzed with life, imperfect yet undeniably real. Ryan smiled to himself, leaning back in his chair. For the first time in a long time, he felt truly at home. Years have passed since the day Ryan Harper stood in front of his demolished home, staring at the rubble that once held his dreams. Today, Willow Creek Estates is almost unrecognizable from the neighborhood it used to be. The manicured lawns and cookie-cutter houses remain, but there's a warmth now, a sense of life, that wasn't there before. It's messy, unpredictable, and wonderfully human. Ryan's story has become legend, not just in Willow Creek, but far beyond. People still talk about the time the HOA messed with General Harper, often followed by laughter or nods of admiration. His name comes up in conversations about fairness, resilience, and standing up for what's right. Some even call him a hero, though he waves off the title with a humble smile. "I was just doing what anyone would do," he says whenever someone brings it up. But deep down, he knows better. Not everyone fights back, not when the odds seem insurmountable, not when the system feels too big to challenge. The legacy of Ryan's battle lives on in tangible ways. Laws inspired by his case, dubbed Ryan's Law by local lawmakers, now protect homeowners across several states, ensuring HOAs can't abuse their power without facing consequences. Towns and cities hold annual seminars where experts discuss property rights and community governance, often inviting Ryan as a guest speaker. He doesn't attend every event, but when he does, he speaks with the same calm authority that silenced Cheryl Dawson all those years ago. Back in Willow Creek, the new homeowner association operates under principles Ryan helped establish: transparency, accountability, and respect. Monthly meetings are open forums where residents voice concerns and vote on decisions together. Rules exist, of course, they always will, but they're designed to enhance the community rather than control it. Neighbors no longer live in fear of fines or reprisals. Instead, they work collaboratively to keep the neighborhood thriving. Ryan himself has settled into a quieter rhythm of life. He spends his days tending to his garden, teaching kids how to plant vegetables, and occasionally helping newcomers navigate the quirks of suburban living. His rebuilt house stands as both a personal triumph and a symbol of collective resilience. Every corner reflects his personality. The flagpole out front, the bookshelves lined with military history, the backyard bursting with color, and remind him of how far he's come. But perhaps the most profound change is within Ryan himself. Before the HOA scandal, he thought of Willow Creek as a place to retire, a quiet retreat after decades of service. Now it's something more, a true home, built not just of bricks and mortar but of shared experiences and mutual trust. He's closer to his neighbors than he ever imagined possible, forming bonds that feel like family. Mrs. Thompson drops by regularly with fresh-baked pies. Jake mows Ryan's lawn whenever he notices it getting long. Even Max seems happier these days, wagging his tail nonstop as kids race past during weekend games of tag. One evening, as Ryan sits on his porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, he reflects on everything that's happened. The anger and frustration he felt during those early days have faded, replaced by gratitude for the support of his neighbors, for the lessons learned, and for the chance to rebuild not just his house but his sense of purpose. Life doesn't give guarantees, he thinks to himself, sipping a cup of coffee. But maybe that's the point. Maybe it's about finding strength in uncertainty, beauty in imperfection. As if on cue, a group of children runs past, giggling and chasing each other with glow sticks in hand. Their laughter echoes through the streets, filling the air with pure joy. Ryan watches them for a moment, then leans back in his chair, letting the peacefulness wash over him. Willow Creek isn't perfect. It never will be. There are still disagreements, still moments of tension. But that's okay. A neighborhood isn't defined by its rules or its aesthetics. It's defined by its people. And in this community, people care for one another. They listen, they learn, and they grow together. For Ryan Harper, that's enough. More than enough. Because sometimes, the greatest victories aren't measured in lawsuits won or policies changed. Sometimes, they're found in the simple, everyday moments of connection, the kind that remind you why fighting for your home is always worth it.